world of difference. I mean, first of all, we had to get a license. Second, if you wanted to import technology, we had to get a clearance from the Director General of Technical Development that this technology supplier and the technology is approved at a particular price and a particular royalty at a particular whatever. After that, we had to get approval from the Reserve Bank of India to remit the foreign exchange, and you had to get clearance from explosives or chemical. Many of these processes remain. As I said, the real change has been that you don't require approvals for licensing and you don't require approvals for technology import because the guidelines have been laid down. So I would like to see us move away from physical control to controls of self-regulation and what are laid out on the guidelines. I mean, there's a world of difference. Today, if I want to set up a manufacturing plant which does not require environmental clearance, I can do it by just registering as an entity without having to go through any control. I would have to register for sale tax, I would have to register for excise. If I use a boiler, I would have to get clearance from the boiler inspector. If it's a chemical industry, I would have to get clearance from explosives, etc. because of there are normally more or less in every chemical industry there's some chemical which comes in which is either a fire hazard or an explosive hazard or whatever. So some kind of clearance is required. But most of these also we can shift away from getting physical licenses. Suppose you get an environment clearance and then you violate the clearance. An absurd example is that we are taking permission. Suppose you have to commit a murder, you take permission and they said, okay, you cannot commit a murder, but then you go ahead and commit it. Then you try it by law, right? But you don't need permission or a license to say that you are not going to commit a murder. Just like that, in an environment, if they lay out the guidelines that your COD, which is the chemical oxygen demand or the biological oxygen demand, these are the parameters which determine environmental clearances. So this will not exceed 50 or it will not exceed 100, which means you will not pollute basically, and that your emissions will not be beyond this, your discharge will not be beyond this, etc. If you lay down those guidelines and then you have a mechanism that you keep in, on random basis, you keep checking, and if somebody violates, you prosecute. But by giving an environment clearance, you are actually taking away the onus from, so if I take an environment clearance and if I violate it, that is less of a problem than getting the clearance itself. So I think we need to move away from this mindset that by granting a license or by granting a clearance or by granting the permission, you're really doing nothing. When in 1991, India's foreign exchange reserves had fallen to zero, and India actually had to ship its physical gold to the Bank of England. And my view is that the liberalization and reform was preempted not by choice but by compulsion, and became choice only later on. As to who was the architect of the reform, I would say Narasimha Rao was the architect of the reform. Manmohan Singh was picked up from, he had served as the RBI governor earlier, but in 1991 he was in the University Grants Commission. He was picked out from University Grants Commission as Finance Minister of India, a bureaucrat with no political experience. Now, in my opinion, that lack of political experience was actually a boon, because it allowed Manmohan Singh to take independent decisions without caring about how his political career would be affected as a result of those decisions. So Narasimha Rao was one of the brightest minds. As a very young man, I have had the occasion of going on several delegations from FICCI with Narasimha Rao to Paris, and I have seen him operate. He was a man of very few words. He was known as a pouter, that whenever there was a dilemma, he would just pout and nobody would know what is going on in his mind. But he had the ability to speak, read and write 9 languages. And I think he picked the right team to change the country and to bring about that reform process. The second person I think who carried this through was Atal Bihari Vajpayee. He put on ground many of these things which the country required. His biggest contribution was towards infrastructure, particularly the physical infrastructure and road building and so on.